Universal basic income has been on the table for a while now in the United States, ever since Andrew Yang entered the presidential race back in 2019 and into 2020, and unfortunately for him, dropped out a little later on. But he brought an issue to the table that I believe is really important, because universal basic income is a really great way to ensure that the foundation of an economy is always stable. And if with what we have right now in our scattershot welfare system that's means tested and it creates the division of who gets it and who doesn't, and therefore you have this whole division of people, the first side who try to get it saying, I'm starving, I'm out of work, I'm having trouble finding a job, I can't feed myself or my kids, I need this. And then on the other side you get, well, you dumbass libtards need just work for a living. Look at me, I got money, I work and you don't. You ain't paying nothing to feed your damn kids. And then that's just completely. It's not only ridiculous and absurd, but it's unnecessary. Okay, because this whole division is artificial. Universal programs are much harder to formulate these kinds of divisions on because they're universal. Everybody's privy to them. Now, with the case of universal basic income, the people who are privy to it are adult citizens, all adult citizens. So basically 18 and older. Now, there are around 330 million people in the country, and I've crunched the numbers on this, okay? So for those people who say, well, UBI is not viable, it's not, how are you going to pay for it? I'm getting so tired of that question. It is viable, and you can pay for it. We are paying for it. Our current welfare system is 15 trillion on average over 10 years, okay? Now, with these corporate bailouts that just happened, it's going to be a lot more over the 10-year period. That said, the optics are even better. And the math is even better when you really break everything down, because the adult citizen in the country, okay, if you take away from the 330 million people, and for $2,000 a month for 330 million people, it works out to about 5 trillion over 10 years. Think about that a second, okay? We currently spend about 15 trillion on average. 5 trillion over 10 years for an entire population in this country. And that's more than the adult citizens. So if you take away all the people who aren't adults yet, well, then you're looking anywhere between 3 to 4 trillion. Even better, right? You save more. So that will actually create a strong foundation for the economy. And it also gives people a means by which they can launch their own visions for the future. It kind of severs the interdependency between the working class and the owner class. And this is the big scare that the owner class has, because, I think they know, if they've crunched the numbers on this, I think they know UBI is less expensive than the current welfare system, including corporate welfare. And what it'll do is it will take away their power over the working class and the poor. And it creates a solid, strong consumer base rather than a solid, strong elite class. Because this flushes out the reality, and this is the reality regardless of what system you have, that elites have to depend on the greater majority of the population in order to get rich. It has to circulate. That's how it's always worked. Those who have the money, they want something from somebody, they have to pay them, and then the person who gets paid, they recirculate that money back into the economy, and these rich people try to find ways to make sure that money comes right back to them. That's the way it's always worked. But now with this trickle-down economics theory, it's just a scam. It's a complete scam. And it was basically a green light for the wealthy elites to loot the treasury and cut out the middleman, being the working class and the poor. Because before the Reagan years, the working class and the poor in this country were a lot better off, relatively speaking. But over the years, as unions were destroyed and as wages remained stagnant, their standard of living went down. The wealthy elites, meanwhile, were basically, in a certain way, kind of bringing back the Gilded Age, to the point where they were almost feudalist monarchs again in their own right. So you could kind of say that corporations, as a result of this, are kind of like global feudalist kingdoms. All right. Anybody who knows the history of this knows that capitalism was born out of feudalism, right? So what UBI does is it recognizes that the foundation has to be strong in order for the entire system to remain strong. So in a capitalist system, it's actually more important that the people at the bottom have the guaranteed income, because that means the system is stable. All right? That means the foundation is strong, the rest can be fixed, but that foundation has to remain strong in order for the economy to work. Now, another thing this will do is it will incentivize people in a way, in a kind of indirect way, to pursue their own dreams, their own ambitions and goals, because they won't be dependent on an employer anymore. They won't be dependent on the owner class. So if you want to be, say, an artist, if you want to be a brewer, you want to be a musician, you want to start up a gym or a jazz club or something on your own, you can do that with UBI, and you won't have to go to these rich people and say, I need to borrow money, and they'll say, okay, I'm charging you this with interest. It may not do away with it completely, but it does minimize it. And another thing you can do with UBI is start up worker co-ops, which can, replace many of the former quasi-feudalist hierarchical kingdoms. And you can reform the tax code to benefit people who start co-ops and carry through with co-ops and try to maintain them. We can talk about that in a later segment. But UBI is a way of strengthening the foundation of an economy, of an entire society, because it recognizes not just the economic reality that the majority of the people need to have the purchasing power. It also recognizes that your human worth must be taken into account in these calculations. You can't just rely on somebody's economic worth per the dictations of those who already have the money. So if you're someone who's in the owner class and you say, okay, I'm going to hire you to do this, you're only going to be worth the minimum wage, $7.25. Well, then your human worth in our current system is essentially only $7.25 an hour, which amounts to however much you work a year. And that's just not fair to anybody, because your human worth, if you're not alive, you can't work, right? You have no economic worth if your human worth isn't already taken into account. So if you already have the money with UBI to feed yourself, to house yourself, pay your basic bills, food, clothing, shelter, well, you're good. Then you can pursue whatever you need to. You want to get a job, you can get a job. You want to start a business. Because if you're on the street, you have no money, you're having to beg for food, you got the cops on you constantly because you're loitering or violating private property laws or whatever the case is, you're screwed. You're totally screwed. And your human worth is basically kicked to the curb and stomped into mush by the owner class. Does that sound like a free society? I don't think so. That's an oppressive society. The system we have now is designed to oppress those who don't already have money and power. UBI flips that on its head. And it's also, again, less expensive. So that's one of the things about UBI. If you do it right, you can replace it. Replace our current scattershot system. Again, I mentioned this earlier, that $15 trillion compared to $3.4 trillion, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? And another argument to be made, or a debate to be had, more specifically, if you wanted to bring the inflation debate into the issue, that's fair. So which do we peg for inflation? Do we peg wages for inflation, or do we peg UBI for inflation? Well, if you're on the right, you might argue, okay, well, let's peg UBI for inflation because we want companies to remain competitive. And to remain competitive, companies have to increase their profit margins and measure them against each other. That's just the rich and the business class's way of doing the little exercise in the boys' room, so to speak. They don't do it with their junk, they do it with their wallets. But that said, if you want to maintain businesses here, the better approach would probably be to peg UBI for inflation as opposed to wages. The other way to go, of course, is to peg wages for inflation and just have UBI as the standard, $2,000 a month regardless, and then you just keep raising wages all the time. Well, what that'll do is raise costs all the time, unfortunately. So I personally think it's a better idea to peg UBI for inflation as opposed to wages. Now, you should still have the ability to unionize and form co-ops and bring your grievances to an employer and be like, hey, things aren't working out here right now. We need better wages. We need safer conditions. We need protective equipment, whatever the case may be. And of course, backtracking here a little bit under Medicare for All, if we have that, that's not even on the table anymore. Everybody has that. So that would be great, right? But UBI gives people the option to do their own thing. to not have to depend on someone who already has a company and is already rich and powerful. And that's the ultimate weapon that we can use to, determine our own destiny. UBI helps us help ourselves. It's not a way of making people lazy. It's not a way of saying, okay, creating a welfare state. In context, UBI gives us the tools we need to build our own futures without having to go to people who are already rich and owe interest and whatnot. Another thing that can tie into this is a public banking infrastructure, and I can get into that later on. But UBI is less expensive, it frees up the working class and the poor, and it forces the rich and the owner class to kind of eat their own words in a way. Like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work hard. Well, now they have to do it. And realistically, right now, they don't have to do it. We have to do it for them. Well, now if we have UBI, it's like, okay, you guys want to get rich, go out there and do the work yourself. You think they're going to want to do it? Nah, they're not going to want to do it. What do? They go to other countries, right? So with that in mind, what do employers do a lot? They outsource. Well, in the case of UBI, if you have that, it is less expensive, so everybody's going to save money under a program like that. But now employers no longer have power over the working class, so what are they going to do? They're going to try to go to another country like China, like India, Philippines, wherever there are fewer labor laws, no minimum wages, no regulations, and they're able to exploit them and get even richer in the process. So that's how they do that. So how do you stop that? Well, the price of admission, in my mind, this is just my opinion on this, okay? I think that in order to keep people from outsourcing, number one, worker co-ops would certainly take care of that problem as opposed to leaving the economy up to quasi-feudalist kingdoms where it's dictated from the top. But you also need to have the price of admission of outsourcing be, okay, you, the owner, you, the executive, the business person, whatever, you want to outsource, you can go yourself, but you've got to leave the business here. So you can take your money, you can go somewhere else, but you can't take the jobs with you. You can't take the ownership of the company. You have to sever your connection from the boxes that you'll be leaving behind and put them in the hands of the workers. And not only that, but you're going to have to pay them in advance a year's annual salary plus the total profits from that box from the previous year. All that together is the price of admission. You really think they're going to be willing to do that? Nah, too high of a price. They're probably going to stay here, right? So that's my 2 cents on that. So anyway, that's UBI. It's a way of strengthening the foundation of the economy and ensuring it remains stable. And it is less expensive, again. So I will be doing some more videos later on. Thanks for listening, guys.